When my father was buried, another man took his place, not as a father, but as an owner. This house now has new rules, he would say with eyes full of malice. In a single night, everything that remained of my childhood was shattered forever. What an immense joy to be here talking with you today. I'm Eleanor Grace, 72 years young, born in a small town called Pine Creek on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, but now I live here in Portland, Oregon, this beautiful city that embraced me as its daughter. Time passes, but the heart stays young, doesn't it? Today, I woke up early as I always do. Even before the sun appeared, I was already in my kitchen preparing a nice hot cup of coffee. I love sitting on my porch, feeling the breeze on my face and giving thanks for another day. From my house, I can see the Willamette River when the day is clear. What a beautiful view, my dears. It's like a hug that nature gives me every morning. You know what I love doing most? Quilting. I have a collection of quilts and table runners that you wouldn't believe. Each stitch made with love, each pattern thought out with care. I started quilting when I was about 50, after the children were grown. Before that, life was just work and more work. But quilting brought me peace when I needed it most. I learned to quilt from a neighbor, Ms. Carmichael, God rest her soul. She taught me my first stitches when I was going through difficult times. She used to say, "Eleanor, each stitch is an organized thought, each line is a new path." And wasn't she right? In my quilting, I also stitched my life together, organizing memories, some sweet, others not so much. Today, I live in this simple but cozy house with my 2 cats, Whiskers and Mittens, who are my daily companions. My son August lives nearby with his family and always visits on Sundays, bringing my grandchildren who are the light of my eyes. Oh, before I forget, if you're enjoying this chat, could you do this grandma a favor? Click that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my stories. It warms this grandma's heart. And you, my dears, who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, from which town or city are you watching? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of affection. You know, life wasn't always this bed of roses that it seems today. I had my stormy days, like everyone else. And it was during one of those storms that I learned the true value of courage. Have you ever heard that sometimes we need to face the big bad wolf to discover the strength that exists within us? Well, my story has a big bad wolf, but it also has a lot of strength and hope. Sometimes I think I needed to go through all of that to become who I am today. A woman who learned to value every ray of sunshine after a long, dark night. It all started when I was just a girl, back in Pine Creek, where the mountain winds blew strong and border tales lulled my childhood dreams. I was born in Pine Creek, a border town where Kentucky meets Tennessee in an embrace of rivers and fields. Our house was small but cozy, painted light blue, with a large yard where my mother, Eleanor, planted a bit of everything. Oh, how I miss my mother's garden. The reddest tomatoes, the sweetest peaches, and the smell of herbs she used in her teas and seasonings. My father, Ernest, worked as a customs officer at the state line. A serious man, of few words, but with a loving gaze. Every night when he came home from work, he brought something hidden in his pocket. A caramel, a colorful ribbon, or a new story he had heard during the day. I was an only child, the apple of the family's eye, as they used to say. Our routine was simple but full of love. We would wake up with the rooster's crow from our backyard. Sultan, a majestic bird who thought he owned everything. My mother prepared breakfast with fresh homemade bread. She kneaded bread every morning. The smell filled the entire house. Then I would go to school, the only one in town where all the children from the region studied. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Irvine, a lady with snow-white hair in a bun, glasses on the tip of her nose, and the patience of an angel. She was the one who taught me to read and write, and always said I had a special way with words. After school, it was time to play. My friends, Clara, Thomas, and Beatrice, and I would meet in the field near my house. We played tag, hide and seek, jacks, and when the sun began to set, it was time to go home. Our feet always dirty with soil, our hands stained from the fruits we picked along the way, and our hearts full of that joy that only childhood provides. On Sundays, the family gathered for the traditional barbecue. My father would start the grill early in the morning, while my mother prepared the potato salad with mayonnaise that everyone loved. Neighbors would show up, bringing guitars, and the afternoon passed with conversations, laughter, and singing. It was a time when doors were left open and everyone looked after each other. Our life wasn't one of wealth, but we never lacked the essentials. My father worked hard to ensure I could study and have some things that other children had. My mother, besides the household chores, sewed for others, making clothes for the more affluent families in town. I remember her bent over that black Singer machine, humming softly, while fabrics transformed into dresses, pants, and shirts in her skilled hands. The winter in Pine Creek was harsh, with that cutting wind that came from the mountains. On the coldest nights, we would gather around the wood stove. My father would tell stories of old times, of war and peace, of brave mountain men and border ghosts. I would curl up under the wool blanket my grandmother had woven, half scared, half enchanted by those tales. When I turned 10, I noticed my father seemed more tired. He would come home from work and sit in the porch chair, breathless, hand on his chest. My mother prepared lemon balm and linden tea, but worry was etched on her face. Dr. Maurice, the only doctor in town, came to visit us frequently. He used words I didn't understand, like hypertension and heart problems. I began to notice whispers among the adults when they thought I wasn't listening. My mother cried secretly while washing clothes. Visits to our home increased, but they no longer had the same joy as before. Something was changing, and I, with my childhood innocence, couldn't understand exactly what it was. But I felt a tightness in my chest every time I saw my father struggle to smile when he looked at me. It was on an autumn morning, with leaves slowly falling from trees, that our lives turned upside down. My father couldn't get out of bed. His lips were purple, and one side of his body seemed unresponsive. My mother screamed for help, and neighbors came running. They took my father urgently to the small-town hospital. I stayed with Mrs. Zelda, our neighbor, who tried to distract me with cookies and stories, but I knew something terrible was happening. 3 days later, my father left this world. The doctor explained it was a stroke, a consequence of the high blood pressure he had been fighting to control. I remember the coffin in our living room, flowers everywhere, the pitying looks cast my way. "Poor little thing, so young and already without a father," the women would say, as if I couldn't hear them. My mother, dressed in black, seemed to have aged 10 years in just 1 week. It was at the funeral that I saw my grandfather Herschel for the first time in years. He was my father's father, a tall man with broad shoulders and a stern gaze. He lived in Louisville and rarely visited us. My mother always said they didn't get along, that my grandfather hadn't approved of their marriage because he thought my mother wasn't from a good family. That day, he appeared dressed in black, with a hat he didn't remove even inside the church. He greeted everyone coldly, even me, his only granddaughter. After the funeral, when we returned home, my grandfather didn't leave with the others. He sat in the living room with a suitcase beside him, observing everything with critical eyes. It was then that I realized our lives were about to change again, but this time it wouldn't be for the better. The mourning for my father, which was already painful, gained a new weight with the presence of that man who, without my knowing, would bring the darkest shadows to our home. The arrival of my grandfather Herschel changed everything in our house. At first, my mother explained that he would stay for just a few weeks to help us organize things after my father's passing. After all, as a customs officer, my father had left some benefits, but the paperwork was complicated, and we needed someone who understood these matters. It soon became clear that my grandfather had no intention of leaving. "A woman and a girl alone have no way of managing," he said one night as we dined in silence. "Ernest wouldn't have approved of this. As his father, it's my responsibility to take care of you now." My mother, still immersed in grief, just nodded. In those days, a widow with a young daughter faced many difficulties. Bills began to pile up, and the money my father had left wouldn't last forever. My grandfather's presence, who received a decent pension, seemed like a solution, even if temporary. The first changes were subtle. My grandfather rearranged the living room furniture, saying, "This way is better." Then he began to decide meal times. "In my house, dinner was always at 6 sharp, he would say, though this wasn't his house. My mother's sewing machine, which used to be in the living room where she attended to clients, was moved to a dark corner of the bedroom. "A decent woman doesn't receive strangers in her home," he declared when my mother timidly protested. "If you want to sew, let it be for us, not for others." Gradually, visits from my mother's friends became rare. My grandfather didn't welcome them, hovering nearby during conversations with his disapproving gaze. He would invent urgent tasks for my mother, interrupting the brief moments of relaxation she had. I still went to school, but now had strict hours to return home. No playing with friends after school. "A girl in the streets gives people something to talk about," my grandfather would say, waiting for me at the school gate every day, right on time. One afternoon, I came home and found my mother crying in the kitchen. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she quickly wiped away her tears when she saw me. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, frightened. "Nothing, honey. I'm just tired," she answered, forcing a smile. Later, I discovered the reason. My grandfather had found old letters my father had written to my mother when they were engaged. He said they were indecent and burned them in the wood stove, along with some photographs my mother kept dear. It was as if he wanted to erase any happy memory we had. My mother's clothes also began to change. Her colorful dresses were replaced by dark, plain pieces. "A respectable woman, especially a widow, dresses with decorum," he would say. On my 12th birthday, my mother tried to throw a small party. She invited only Clara and her family, who were our closest neighbors. She prepared a chocolate cake and some treats. When my grandfather found out, he was furious. "A party? With what money? Do you think we're in a position to waste like this?" Even when my mother explained she had used her own money, saved from some sewing work she did in secret, he didn't yield. The party was canceled, the cake divided among the 3 of us in a silent, sad dinner. That night, I cried quietly in my room until I fell asleep. The situation worsened when I began to develop my adolescent body. My grandfather started looking at me differently, with a strange gleam in his eyes that gave me chills. He criticized any clothes I wore, even the simplest ones. "This girl is getting too provocative," he would tell my mother, as if I weren't present. "She needs to learn to behave like a proper young lady." The rules multiplied each day. We couldn't listen to music because it was the devil's work. The Sunday visit to church became mandatory, where we sat in the front row under the watchful eye of my grandfather, who made a point of showing the entire community how well he was taking care of his deceased son's family. At home, my mother and I were responsible for all household chores. She cooked, washed, ironed, all according to his demands. I cleaned, tidied up, served meals. If something wasn't the way he wanted, there would be a sermon, sometimes accompanied by a slap on the hand or a tug on the ear. "Ill-mannered girl, your father would be ashamed," he would say, although I knew, deep in my heart, that my father would never have treated me that way. The money in our house now came exclusively from my grandfather, and he made a point of reminding us of this at every moment. "You eat what I buy, you live under my roof." The fact that the house was ours, built with my father's sweat, seemed to no longer matter. My mother withered little by little. That vibrant, full-of-life woman who hummed while sewing gave way to a silent shadow that moved through the house following orders. Her eyes, once bright, now seemed dull, distant. At night, I would hear her cry softly in her room, but when I tried to console her, she would only say, "It will pass, dear. One day it will pass." It was around this time that my grandfather began to bring friends home, men his age or older, who came to play cards and drink whiskey in our living room. My mother and I were required to serve snacks and drinks, always with a forced smile on our faces. One of these men, Mr. Thurston, who owned a store in town, and another, Mr. Clement, who had been in the military, looked at me in a way that made me want to disappear. They made comments about how I was becoming a young lady and would chuckle when I passed by. My grandfather didn't reprimand them. On the contrary, he seemed proud of that attention. "One day you'll need a husband, girl," he would say in a threatening tone. And not all men have patience with spoiled girls. One night, after his friends left, my grandfather called me to the living room. He was visibly drunk, red eyes, breath heavy with alcohol. "Come here, girl," he ordered. I approached fearfully, keeping my distance. He looked me up and down, with that gaze that froze my soul. "You're growing to look just like your grandmother when she was young," he said, his voice slurred. "She was also like that, all full of don't touch me's. But she learned to be a good wife. Oh yes, she did." I ran to my room and locked the door, trembling. That night, I told my mother what had happened. For the first time in a long time, I saw a spark of reaction in her eyes. "Stay away from him, Eleanor," she whispered. "Whenever he's drinking, stay in your room with the door locked. Promise." I promised, and for a few weeks we managed to maintain this precaution. But my grandfather soon noticed our strategy and confiscated the key to my room. "No doors are locked in this house," he yelled. "What absurdity is this? What are you hiding from me?" It was then that I realized we were trapped in an increasingly tight web. We had nowhere to go, no money to start over elsewhere. My mother's relatives lived far away in rural Virginia, and she had lost contact with them years ago. The few friends we still had were systematically pushed away by my grandfather. Fear became our constant companion. Fear of the shouting, the humiliations, the gazes, the heavy hands that sometimes fell upon us for insignificant reasons. At night I would hug my pillow and dream of the day I would be big enough to take my mother out of that situation. I dreamed of my father, imagining what it would be like if he were still alive. One Sunday afternoon, after church, I met my former teacher, Mrs. Irvin, in the square. My grandfather was distracted talking to the pastor, and I had a few precious minutes alone with her. "Eleanor, you look so worn out," she said, holding my hands. "Is everything all right at home?" Tears came without me being able to contain them. I wanted to tell her everything, ask for help, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was greater than the courage. "If you need anything at all, come find me," she said, slipping a piece of paper with her address into my pocket. "My door will always be open for you." That small gesture of kindness was like a ray of light in the darkness. I kept the paper like a treasure, although I knew it would be almost impossible to visit her without my grandfather knowing. Things reached a critical point when I turned 13. There was no celebration, of course. It was just another day under my grandfather's regime. But something changed that night. He came home later than usual, stumbling, the smell of alcohol even stronger than normal. And he wasn't alone. Thurston and Clement accompanied him, equally drunk. "Where are the women of the house?" I heard him shout from the living room, while my mother and I cowered in the kitchen. A shiver ran down my spine. There was something different in his voice, something even more threatening than usual. My mother looked at me with eyes wide with panic. "Eleanor," she whispered urgently, "take that bundle of clothes by the sink and go out the back. Run to Mrs. Irvine's house. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." "But what about you, Mom?" I asked, feeling my heart race. "I'll distract them. Then I'll meet you there. Go, honey, for the love of God. Go now." At that moment, I understood that the danger that had always hovered over us was about to materialize in a terrible way. With tears in my eyes, I hugged my mother quickly. "Lena, Eleanor, come here right now." My grandfather's voice thundered through the house. I couldn't escape that night. When I tried to go out the back door, I found it locked with a new padlock that wasn't there before. My grandfather, in his constant distrust, had blocked all possible escape routes. I returned to the kitchen, trembling, to find my mother being dragged by the arm to the living room. "Thought you could fool me? In this house, nothing happens without me knowing," my grandfather vociferated, his eyes bloodshot from alcohol and rage. What happened in the following hours is something I try, even today, to bury in the depths of my memory. The three men, drunk beyond reason, transformed our house into a nightmare scenario. The lights were turned off, leaving only the weak illumination of a lamp. Shadows danced on the walls while male voices laughed and shouted orders. My mother, in a last act of protection, tried to hide me in the kitchen cupboard, begging in whispers for me to make no noise, no matter what I heard. But they found me, and that night we lost much more than our dignity. The next morning, the house was in sepulchral silence. My grandfather and his friends had left at dawn, as if nothing had happened. I found my mother in the kitchen, mechanically preparing coffee, her face swollen from crying so much, purple marks on her arms. Our gazes met, full of a pain that words could never express. "Let's get out of here, Mom," I begged, holding her trembling hands. "To where, honey?" she replied, her voice broken. "Who would believe us against his word? He is respected in town, has influential friends. We are just us." The impotence was like a crushing weight on our shoulders. In the days that followed, we lived like ghosts in our own home. My grandfather returned to acting as if nothing had happened, perhaps even more kind than usual, bringing small gifts, allowing some previously forbidden liberties. It was his perverse way of maintaining control, of guaranteeing our silence. I stopped going to school. I couldn't face people, fearing that somehow they knew, that they could see the shame stamped on my face. My mother, always so strong despite everything, seemed to have broken inside. She moved through the house like an automaton, fulfilling her tasks, but her eyes were empty, like windows of an abandoned house. The visits from the friends became more frequent. We learned to disappear at these moments, to lock ourselves in the bathroom, the only room in the house that still had a key. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. We lived in a constant state of alert, sleeping with one eye open, startled by any noise. Weeks later, my mother began to feel sick in the morning. The nausea, the paleness, the dizziness, signs that I, in my innocence, didn't immediately recognize, but that she, with terror stamped in her eyes, understood perfectly. One morning, while my grandfather was at the store buying bread, she confessed her fear to me. "I think I'm expecting a baby, Eleanor," she said, her voice almost inaudible. The ground seemed to open beneath my feet. A baby? How could we bring a child into that environment of horror? "Who's—" I began to ask, but fell silent when I saw the devastated look of my mother. "I don't know," she answered, and those two words contained a universe of pain. It could be his, or the other's. There's no way to know. In the following days, I noticed changes in my own body too. Morning sickness, sensitivity, extreme fatigue. The same terror I saw in my mother's eyes was now reflected in mine. It was impossible, unthinkable, but reality faced us with its cruelty. Both of us carried in our wombs the fruit of that terrible night. "He will kill us if he finds out," I whispered to my mother one night, while we were alone in the kitchen. To my surprise, I saw something that I hadn't seen in a long time in her eyes. Determination. "No, honey. He won't have that chance," she said, with a firmness that scared me. "We've endured too much. It's time to end this." In the days that followed, my mother began to act differently, more submissive in my grandfather's presence, almost flattering. He seemed satisfied with the change, boasting about how he had tamed that stubborn woman. Little did he know that behind that apparent submission, a plan born of desperation was brewing. My mother began to save small amounts of money, cents that were left over from shopping, some coins she found around the house. She hid them inside a hollow soap, a trick she learned from her grandmother during the war. At the same time, she made notes in a small notebook that she kept hidden under the mattress lining. "What are you writing, Mom?" I asked one night, curious. "Our future, honey," she replied, with a strange gleam in her eyes. "Our future." She explained to me that she had a brother, Julian, who served in the army in Fort Campbell. They hadn't spoken in years due to an old disagreement, but he was our only hope. If we could reach him, perhaps we would have a chance to start over far from there. But how will we get out of here? He controls every step we take, I questioned, trying not to let myself be carried away by false hopes. We have to be smarter than him, Eleanor. Observe, learn, wait for the right moment. And so we did. We began to carefully study my grandfather's habits. When he drank more, when he went out, who visited, where he kept the keys. Every detail was important for our escape plan. We discovered that he kept a small fortune inside a fake book on the living room shelf. Money that by right was partially ours, fruit of the pension that my father had left and that my grandfather intercepted. My mother decided that when we fled, we would take only enough for the trip to Fort Campbell, not out of greed, but out of desperate need. Time, however, was against us. Our bodies changed each day, and soon it would be impossible to hide our condition. My grandfather's behavior also became increasingly erratic. He alternated moments of apparent kindness with explosions of fury without apparent reason. On one of those nights of fury, after discovering that some change was missing from the jar where he kept coins, he turned the entire house upside down, looking for the thief. By miracle, he didn't find our hiding place in the soap, but the climate became even tenser. "If I discover that you are stealing from me, you'll regret being born," he threatened, pointing his trembling finger at both of us. It was on that night that my mother had a different idea. Her gaze changed, and I realized that the plan had transformed into something more definitive, more risky. "We can't wait any longer, Eleanor," she said when we were alone. "We can't simply run away. He would find us, and then—" She didn't need to complete the sentence. We both knew that he would be relentless. "What are we going to do then?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. My mother breathed deeply before answering. "We're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." The determination in her voice scared me. It was no longer the broken woman I had seen in the last few months. It was a force of nature, moved by the most primitive instinct of all, to protect her offspring at any cost. In the days that followed, she began to research herbs and plants in the small municipal library, telling my grandfather that she was looking for recipes to impress him. He, in his arrogance, believed it, even felt flattered. He brought home an old book about medicinal plants that had belonged to my grandmother. "She knew everything about herbs, your grandmother," he commented in a rare moment of nostalgia. "She made teas that cured any ill." Ironic how that comment would become a fundamental part of our plan. My mother found in the yard a plant she was looking for. She discreetly picked some leaves, dried them in hiding, and kept the resulting powder in a small cloth bag. "What is that?" I asked, concerned about the direction things were taking. "Just something to make our grandfather sleep deeply for a few hours," she explained, avoiding my gaze. "Long enough for us to get the money and leave before he wakes up." I didn't entirely believe her, but I was too desperate to question. The plan was simple. The next time he brought his friends to drink, we would put the powder in the whiskey bottle. When they were all unconscious, we would take the money and flee on the night train to Fort Campbell. The opportunity arose sooner than we expected. On a Friday, my grandfather announced that Thurston and Clement would come to celebrate a successful business deal. He ordered us to prepare snacks and leave the house impeccable. This would be our only chance. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that I feared they could hear it. My mother, however, maintained a frightening calm while preparing everything, including the special bottle that would be served at the right moment. The men arrived at the beginning of the night, already cheerful from drinks consumed at the bar. They sat in the living room, laughing loudly, telling crude stories. We served the snacks as ordered, avoiding looking directly at them, especially at the two friends, whose hands tried to touch us when we passed. My grandfather, amid the stories, mentioned that he would soon have important news to tell his friends. The look he cast us made my blood freeze. Somehow he knew or suspected our condition. There was no more time to lose. When he asked for the special bottle he kept for occasions like that, my mother brought the one we had prepared. She generously served the 3 glasses and observed with a forced smile as they drank enthusiastically. The effect was faster than we expected. In less than half an hour, the 3 men were completely unconscious, snoring heavily in the living room. "Quick, Eleanor," my mother whispered. "Take only the essentials. We have little time." We ran to pack a small bundle each. Basic clothes, the money hidden in the fake book, a photo of my father that my mother had managed to save from the burning. When we were about to go out the door, my mother stopped, looking fixedly at the 3 men fallen in the living room. "Wait here," she said, with a voice I didn't recognize. "I have something to do before." I observed, paralyzed, as she went to the shed in the back and returned with a thick rope. For a terrible moment, I thought she intended to do something irreparable. "Mom," I began, terrified. "Don't worry," she reassured me, noticing my panic. "I'm not going to do what you're thinking, but we need to ensure they don't immediately follow us." With a skill that surprised me, she tied the 3 men together using complex knots that she learned from my father, who was an aficionado of navigation. Then she tore strips of sheets and gagged each of them. "This won't hurt them, but will give us enough time to be far away when they wake up," she explained. "Now let's go. The train leaves in an hour." We were about to leave when she stopped again, as if she had had a revelation. "No, Eleanor." "It's still not enough," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "They will come after us. They know people everywhere. We need something more. Definitive." It was then that she had the idea that would change everything. An idea born of desperation, fear, and a fierce instinct for protection. They need to understand that they should never look for us again. They need a lesson they will never forget. And so began the darkest chapter of our escape, one that neither of us imagined when it all started. "We're going to take them to the cemetery," my mother said with a voice so calm that it scared me even more than her suggestion. "To the cemetery? Why?" I asked, confused and terrified. "Because that's where those they should respect are buried. Your father and your grandmother. They need to face what they've done." My heart raced. The cemetery was in the most remote part of town, a somber place even during the day, surrounded by a high wall of ancient stones. At night, no one dared to pass near there. "How are we going to take 3 men there?" I questioned, thinking of the practical impossibility of the idea. My mother already had everything planned. At the back of the house there was a wheelbarrow that my father used to transport materials. It was old but sturdy. "We'll take one at a time, starting with your grandfather." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and apparently impossible. But desperation gave us strength we didn't know we possessed. With superhuman effort, we managed to drag my grandfather, still unconscious, to the wheelbarrow. We covered his body with burlap sacks and, in the darkness of night, followed the dirt road that led to the cemetery. The path seemed endless. Each noise startled us, each shadow seemed an imminent danger. But we continued, moved by a determination born of the deepest fear and the purest need for survival. When we finally reached the rusty gates of the cemetery, my mother took an old key from her pocket. "The gravedigger owes a debt of gratitude to your father," she explained. "He gave me this key a long time ago in case we needed to visit the grave outside normal hours. I never thought we would use it for this." The cemetery was immersed in shadows, only partially illuminated by the crescent moon. Tombstones rose like silent sentinels as we advanced among the gravestones. My mother knew exactly where to go, the most remote corner where our family's tombs were. Side by side, like eternal guardians, were the graves of my father, Ernest, and my grandmother, Matilda, whom I never got to know. My grandfather had ordered an elaborate tomb built for his son, not out of love, but out of ostentation, so that everyone could see how generous and devoted to family he was. "Help me take him out of the wheelbarrow," my mother asked. With difficulty, we dragged my grandfather's inert body until we placed him between the two tombs. It was then that I noticed the tools, a shovel and a hoe, hidden behind my father's grave. "You planned this?" I asked, feeling a chill. "I planned our survival, Eleanor," she answered, with that same frightening calm. "Now dig." We began to open a shallow hole in the ground, between the two tombs. The work was arduous, and my delicate hands were soon full of blisters. But I didn't stop. Each time I thought of giving up, I remembered the terror of the last few weeks, what I carried in my womb, and found strength to continue. When the hole was about 1 meter deep, my mother said it was enough. With joint effort, we put my grandfather in the grave, positioning him so that he was sitting, with his head out. "We don't want to kill him," she explained, as we threw earth around his body, securing it in that grotesque position. "We want him to face his sins." When we finished, only my grandfather's head was visible, as if emerging from the earth itself. He was still breathing, the effect of the herbs keeping him in deep sleep for a few more hours. "And what about the other two?" I asked, exhausted by the physical effort and emotional tension. "We don't have time," my mother answered, looking at the sky that was beginning to lighten slightly on the horizon. "They will remain tied up in the house. When they wake up and free themselves, they will probably come looking for their friend here. By then, we'll be far away." There was one more thing to do. My mother took a piece of paper and a pencil from her pocket. She wrote something with a trembling hand and fixed it in the earth, in front of my grandfather's face, supported on a small cross improvised with twigs. "What did you write?" I asked. "Do you think your wife and your son would be proud of who you've become?" I looked at that man buried up to his neck, at the accusatory note, and felt a confused mixture of emotions. Fear, relief, guilt, satisfaction. Was what we were doing wrong? Perhaps. But it seemed to be the only possible way out in that moment of extreme desperation. "Let's go, Eleanor," my mother said, taking my hand. "We have a train to catch." On the way back, we quickly passed by the house to get our bundles and the money. The two men were still unconscious in the living room, tied up and gagged. My mother left the front door unlocked. "Someone will find them in the morning," she said, "or they will manage to free themselves. Either way, we won't be here to see." We walked hurriedly to the station, mixing with the few people waiting for the dawn train. Workers, travelers, lonely souls with their own secrets and destinations. No one paid attention to us, two women with small bundles, faces partially hidden by shawls. The train arrived punctually, releasing steam and making the platform tremble under our feet. We boarded the last car, choosing a dark and remote corner. When the whistle sounded and the wheels began to move, I felt an enormous weight being torn from my shoulders. "Where are we really going, Mom?" I asked in a whisper. "To Fort Campbell, as we planned. My brother Julian will help us." "Are you sure he'll receive us? You haven't spoken in years." My mother squeezed my hand tightly. "Julian has his faults, but he's an honorable man. When he knows what happened, well, he has a very strong code of honor. And besides," she hesitated, resting her free hand on her belly, "we're carrying his blood. Family is sacred to military men like him." The train gained speed, moving away from Pine Creek, from the house that was our home and our prison, from the cemetery where we left my grandfather buried up to his neck, facing his sins under the silent gaze of the dead. I looked out the window, seeing the lights of the town disappear in the distance. Would it be the last time I would see that place? What awaited us at Fort Campbell? How would I be received by the uncle I didn't even know? And most importantly, what would we do with the children growing in our wombs? Questions without immediate answers swirled in my mind, while the constant rhythm of the rails lulled our desperate flight. "Mom," I finally said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "What if he comes after us? What if—" "He won't come," she interrupted me, with an unshakable certainty in her voice. "Men like your grandfather live on appearances. When he's found in that humiliating situation, his reputation will be destroyed. All the respect he earned in town will transform into laughter and scorn. He will never admit what really happened, and much less come after us, exposing himself even more." She paused before continuing, her gaze lost in the darkness beyond the window. "And even if he wanted to find us, Julian wouldn't allow it. My brother may have his faults, but no one messes with his family. No one." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe. I rested my head on her shoulder, physically and emotionally exhausted, and closed my eyes. The rhythmic swaying of the train lulled me until finally I fell into a deep sleep. The first peaceful sleep in a very, very long time. I dreamed of my father that night. He was standing by a river, smiling at me like in the old days. "Move forward, Eleanor," he said in the dream. "The past stays behind, like the waters that have already flowed. Always look ahead." I woke up with the first rays of sun coming through the train window. My mother was also sleeping, her face finally relaxed, free from the constant tensions of the last few months. I observed her for a moment, noting how, even amid so much suffering, she had found strength to protect us, to take us out of that hell. The train was beginning to slow down. We were arriving at an intermediate station. Through the window, I saw the name of the town, Oak Ridge. We still had a few hours to Fort Campbell. A newspaper vendor passed through the corridor, announcing the headlines of the day. Nothing about a man found buried up to his neck in the Pine Creek Cemetery. It was too early for the news to have reached the newspapers, or perhaps the incident was considered too small for the major outlets. But in a small town like Pine Creek, I knew rumors would run faster than any newspaper. I imagined the scene. Someone, perhaps the gravedigger on his morning rounds, finding my grandfather in that humiliating situation. The buzz that would spread, the laughter hidden behind hands, the sideways glances. For a man like him, who lived on his image of respectability, it would be a punishment worse than any other. "Good morning," my mother murmured, waking up slowly. "Where are we?" "We just passed Oak Ridge," I answered. "We'll soon reach Fort Campbell." She nodded, adjusting herself in the seat. Her gaze was different. There was a determination, a renewed strength that I hadn't seen since before my father's death. "When we arrive," she said in a low voice, "we'll go directly to the base. That's where Julian works. It will be easier to find him there." "And if he doesn't want to help us?" I asked, expressing the fear that still persisted. "Then we'll move forward," she replied simply. "There's always a way, Eleanor. Always." At that moment, looking at my mother, I understood that we had crossed a point of no return. What we did the night before, out of desperation for survival, had transformed us. We were no longer passive victims, but women who took destiny into their own hands, no matter how dark the chosen road. The following hours on the train were spent in contemplative silence. Each mile the train advanced took us away from the nightmare and brought us closer to an uncertain future, but ours. A future that, for the first time in a long time, contained a small seed of hope. The train arrived at Fort Campbell in the early afternoon. The city was very different from Pine Creek, larger, busier, with airs of progress. Taller buildings, wider streets, people walking hurriedly in all directions. We got off at the station, our small bundles in hand, trying not to draw attention. "How will we find the base?" I asked, intimidated by the size of the city. "We'll ask," my mother answered with a serenity that surprised me. An old man selling pastries at a small stand indicated the way. "The 101st Airborne Division Base? It's far from here, ladies. Better take the bus that passes there by the square." We followed his advice and boarded the rickety bus, observing the city pass by the window. Fort Campbell was known as a military town, an important city in the region. The people seemed different too. There were military personnel everywhere, elegant families strolling in the squares, a rhythm of life that contrasted with sleepy Pine Creek. The base was an imposing complex of white buildings surrounded by high walls. At the main entrance, 2 soldiers stood guard. My mother breathed deeply, adjusted her shawl, and walked decidedly toward them. I followed her, trying to hide my nervousness. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she greeted. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Julian Stanley. It's urgent." The soldiers exchanged suspicious looks. "Do you have any document or authorization?" one of them asked. "I'm Lena Stanley, his sister. This is my daughter, Eleanor. We came from Pine Creek and need to see him urgently. It's a family matter." Something in the firmness of her voice must have convinced the soldiers. One of them entered the base, while the other asked us to wait. Minutes that seemed like hours passed until the soldier returned, accompanied by a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing an impeccable uniform with insignias that I didn't understand. I recognized my uncle immediately. He had the same eyes as my mother, dark and deep, although harder. His face showed first surprise, then suspicion, and finally, genuine concern upon seeing the state we were in. "Lena," he said, incredulous, "what happened? Why are you here?" My mother, who had remained strong during our entire escape, collapsed in tears. Perhaps it was the relief of finally being before someone she could trust, or perhaps the weight of everything we had lived through had finally become unbearable. "Julian," she whispered, "we need your help." My uncle didn't ask any more questions there. He ordered a jeep to be prepared and took us to his house, a simple but organized construction on the outskirts of the base, where we met my Aunt Gertrude, a woman of severe appearance who, despite the surprise at our unexpected arrival, received us with the characteristic hospitality of the Southerners. It was only after we had eaten and settled in a guest room that my mother, behind closed doors, told the story to my uncle. Not the most intimate details, those remained between us two, but enough for him to understand the gravity of the situation. I will never forget the transformation on my uncle's face as he listened. The disciplined military man gave way to the enraged man, the protective brother who had failed in his mission. His fists closed and opened, the veins in his neck bulged, and for a moment I feared he would take the first train to Pine Creek to settle accounts with my grandfather. "Why didn't you seek me out before, Lena?" he asked, his voice choked with contained emotion. "You know why," my mother responded simply, "since I married Ernest against your wishes." "That doesn't matter anymore," he interrupted her. "None of that matters now. You are safe here, I promise." It was then that my mother revealed what both of us carried, the most painful consequence of the abuses suffered. My uncle paled, but didn't show repulsion or judgment, only an even greater determination to protect us. "No one will know about this," he guaranteed. "We'll invent a story. We'll say that Lena is a recent widow and came to live with her military brother. Eleanor is too young to be in this situation, but we'll find a way. I know people, discreet doctors who can help." In the days that followed, I realized that my uncle had considerable influence in the city. Thanks to his position in the army and the respect he had earned, doors opened for us. In less than a week, my mother got a job as a seamstress in the home of an important colonel, whose wife was enchanted with her skill. As for me, after a few weeks of recovery, I was enrolled in a school maintained by nuns. The official story was that I had been very sick in Pine Creek and needed new airs to recover. No one questioned. The most important, however, was the medical help we received. Dr. Fellman, an elderly and respected doctor, a personal friend of my uncle, took care of us with discretion and compassion. Due to my age and the circumstances, the decision was made. I could not carry that pregnancy forward. The procedure was performed in secret, in the doctor's own house, with all the care possible at that time. My mother, being an adult, had a choice. After much reflection and conversations with Father Anson, a progressive man for his time and a great confidant of my uncle, she decided to continue with the pregnancy. No matter how it was conceived, she told me one night, this child is not to blame. And perhaps it's a way to start over, to find love where there was only pain. Months later, my sister Cecilia was born, a healthy and beautiful girl who brought light back to my mother's eyes. My uncle registered her as the daughter of my mother with my deceased father, manipulating dates and documents thanks to his influence. For all intents and purposes, Cecilia was just the youngest daughter of the widow Lena, born a few months after the father's death. Meanwhile, in Pine Creek, things followed a course that we only knew long after. My grandfather was found the morning after our escape, still buried up to his neck in the cemetery. It was the friends themselves, Thurston and Clement, who found him, after managing to free themselves from the ropes. The scandal was immense, but the official version that circulated was that unknown bandits had attacked the three men during a drinking spree. My grandfather, humiliated and furious, swore to find the culprits. He even hired an investigator from Louisville to track us down. But my uncle, foreseeing this, had taken precautions. Our names didn't appear on any passenger records, thanks to a conductor friend who altered the lists. In Fort Campbell, we were known by my uncle's surname, Stanley, and not by my father's surname. The investigation eventually cooled. Without concrete clues and with his reputation in tatters, my grandfather ended up leaving Pine Creek a few months later. We learned that he moved to rural Virginia, where he had some distant relatives. We never heard directly from him again, and that was a relief. Our adaptation in Fort Campbell wasn't easy, but each day it became clearer that we had made the right choice. My mother flourished again, away from the shadows of the past. Her talent with sewing soon made her sought after among the important families of the city. With time, she managed to open her own atelier, a dream that my grandfather had destroyed in Pine Creek. As for me, life followed an unexpected course. The nuns discovered that I had a facility with studies and encouraged me to continue. My uncle, despite his rough appearance, enormously valued education and agreed to invest in my formation. At 17, I was accepted at the Fort Campbell Teachers College, where I would graduate as a teacher a few years later. It was at the Teachers College that I met Philip, a young mathematics professor newly arrived from Portland. Tall, with round glasses and a gentle smile, he was different from any man I had known. Patient, respectful, a lover of books and music, Philip courted me with poems and long conversations about literature and philosophy. At first, I was afraid of any male approach. The wounds of the past were still open, and the idea of intimacy terrified me. Philip, however, never pressured me. "We have all the time in the world," he would say, holding my hand with affection. "True love knows how to wait." My mother and my uncle approved of the relationship, especially after my uncle investigated Philip's family background and discovered he came from a respectable family from Portland. When he asked for my hand in marriage, 2 years after we met, I accepted with a heart full of hope and also fear. On the night before the wedding, my mother came to my room for a conversation I will never forget. "Eleanor," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "tomorrow you'll begin a new life. A life that you chose, with a man that you love. That's more than many women achieve in this world." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "The past will always be with us, like a scar that never completely disappears. But scars are marks of survival, not defeat. You survived, daughter. We survived. And now you have the chance to build something beautiful from the ashes." We married in a simple ceremony in the school chapel. Cecilia, then 8 years old, was the flower girl, spreading rose petals down the aisle. My uncle Julian, proud in his dress uniform, conducted me to the altar. My mother cried throughout the entire ceremony. tears of joy, she assured afterward. After the wedding, we moved to Portland, where Philip had secured a position as a professor at the prestigious Lewis and Clark College. My mother and Cecilia remained in Fort Campbell, where the atelier prospered, and my sister had her friends and her school. The separation was painful, but necessary. It was time to build my own path, my own family. And that's exactly what we did. In Portland, a large and cosmopolitan city, no one knew our past. We were just a young couple of teachers starting life. A year later, our first son, August, was born, the same one who visits me every Sunday with his children. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I silently promised that he would never know the kind of pain that marked my childhood. He would be raised with love, respect, and freedom to be whoever he wanted. And so it was. Our family grew with the arrival of Helen 3 years later. We built a simple but dignified life based on love and mutual respect. Philip was always the man he promised to be during our courtship: gentle, understanding, a present father, and a loving husband. My mother and Cecilia visited us frequently. With time, my sister also moved to Portland to study medicine, a choice that filled us with pride. She had inherited the determination of our mother and the intelligence of my uncle. The past was never forgotten, but it lost its power over us. We learned to look forward, to value each moment of peace and joy. And so, day after day, year after year, we built a life that previously seemed impossible. When I look back to that desperate night in the Pine Creek Cemetery, I still feel a shiver. It was an act born of the purest instinct for survival, the only way out we saw in that moment of darkness. I'm not proud of what we did, but I don't regret it either, because it was thanks to that desperate decision that I am here today, telling this story, surrounded by the fruits of a life that I managed to rebuild from the ashes. Who sees me today, at 72, sitting quietly on my porch in Portland, quilting and drinking coffee while I observe the Willamette River, would never imagine the story I carry. Time, that great master, has the power to soften the roughest edges of life, transforming even the most painful memories into lessons of strength and resilience. Portland truly became my home. I've lived in this same house for more than 30 years, a simple construction in the Selwood neighborhood, with a porch that gives a view of the river and a small garden where I grow herbs for tea and seasonings for cooking. It's not a big or luxurious house, but it's impregnated with happy memories, of children growing up laughing, of Sunday lunches with the family gathered. My dear Philip left this world 8 years ago, after 50 years of a happy marriage. It was a peaceful departure, at home, surrounded by us who loved him so much. His health had been deteriorating for a few years, heart problems like my father, but he lived long enough to know and enjoy all the grandchildren. I miss him every day, especially in the mornings when I wake up and, for a brief moment, forget that he's no longer by my side. But I'm grateful for the years we had together, for the love we built, for the family we created. After he was gone, my children insisted that I move to one of their houses. "Mom, you can't stay alone," they would say, worried. But I'm stubborn, like all good Southern women. This is my house, my little corner in the world, and here I intend to stay as long as I have the strength to manage on my own. Not that I'm really alone. My son August lives just 2 blocks from here, with his wife Marianne and my 3 grandchildren, Gabriel, 15, Julia, 12, and little Arthur, 8. They come to visit me almost every day. Sometimes it's just a quick stop after school to get a cake fresh out of the oven. Other times they stay for dinner. My daughter Helen lives farther away, in Seattle, where she works as a pediatrician. She married an engineer, Robert, and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Laura and Brandon, already teenagers. I don't see them as often as I would like, but when they come to spend vacations with me, the house fills with life and noise, something I adore. My sister Cecilia is also always nearby. She pursued a career in medicine, specializing in gynecology, a choice influenced by our own story. She dedicates part of her time to an NGO that helps women victims of violence, a work that fills me with pride. She never married, but adopted 2 girls, my nieces Isabella and Diana, today trained and independent women. My mother, Lena, lived with us in Portland in her last years. She passed away at 82, about 10 years ago, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Until the end, she maintained that silent strength that saved us so many years ago. Her sewing atelier in Fort Campbell transformed into a prosperous business that she eventually sold when she retired. Each stitch, each seam, she would say, was a step to rebuild our dignity. As for my Uncle Julian, the military man who welcomed us at that crucial moment, he retired as a colonel and lived to be 90, always rigid, always correct, but with an immense heart hidden under the uniform. We never had concrete news of my grandfather after his escape to Virginia. We learned years later that he died alone, embittered, with no one by his side, a sad end, but in a way, just for someone who caused so much suffering. My days now follow a tranquil routine that I've learned to value. I wake up early, with the first ray of sun. I prepare my coffee, as the Southern woman I am, and go to the porch to observe the day dawn over the Willamette. Then, I feed my cats, Whiskers and Mittens, 2 old-timers like me that I adopted from the local shelter. The mornings are generally dedicated to quilting. I started late in this art, but today my hands create flowers, birds, and landscapes that seem to come to life in the fabric. I make quilts, table runners, pillows, some for my own use, others to give as gifts, and some I sell at the craft fair that happens in the neighborhood on Saturdays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to the community center where I teach literacy to adults. Even retired from formal education, I can't stop teaching. Seeing the eyes of a 60-year-old worker shine when they manage to read their grandchild's name for the first time, that's priceless. On Wednesdays, it's book club day at the municipal library. We are a group of ladies, and some gentlemen too, who meet to discuss books and, of course, catch up on conversation. I discovered the pleasure of reading late in life, but today my house is full of books, many gifts from my children who know about this late love of mine for written words. The weekends are for family. On Saturday, I shop at the farmer's market, choosing fresh fruits and vegetables, talking with the vendors who already know me by name. On Sunday, it's the day to prepare a good pot roast, with that tender meat and well-seasoned vegetables like they make in the South. The table fills with children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, a large and noisy family that makes me feel rich, not in material goods, but in affection. Now and then, the grandchildren sleep over. They tell stories from school, from friends, from first loves. I listen to everything with attention, giving advice only when requested. "Grandma, how do you understand us so well?" Julia asked recently. I smiled and answered that life taught me to listen more than talk. My house is simple, but cozy. The walls are decorated with family photos, happy moments frozen in time. I have few objects of value, but each one carries a story. The wall clock that belonged to my father, rescued by my mother before our escape. The old sewing machine that was my mother's, now more decorative than functional. The guitar that Philip played on summer nights, now silent but full of memories. I'm not rich in financial terms. A teacher's retirement isn't the most generous, and Philip's that complemented our income diminished considerably after his departure. But I have enough to live with dignity and still help when one of the children or grandchildren needs it. Life taught me that true wealth is in the relationships we build, in the moments of peace we manage to create, in the comfort of a hot cup of tea on a cold afternoon, in the spontaneous laughter of a child, in the sincere hug of a friend. When I look back at the path I traveled from that frightened girl who fled Pine Creek on a desperate night to the woman I am today, grandmother, mother, teacher, quilter, I feel a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. Astonishment for having survived everything, for having found strength where I thought none existed. Gratitude for each person who appeared at the right moment to extend a hand, for each opportunity to start over, for each hug that reminded me that I deserved to be loved. I carry scars, without doubt. There are nights when I still wake up startled, with my heart racing, fragments of nightmares dissipating in the darkness. There are certain noises, certain smells, certain situations that still trigger internal alarms, reflexes of a time that was left behind but never completely disappeared. But I learned to live with these scars, to understand them as part of my story, not as definers of my present or future. As that old Southern saying goes, it's not about how many times you fall off the horse, it's about how many times you get back on. And I got back on. Many times. I will continue to get back on as long as I have strength. Because life, my dears, is this precious gift that we receive and that deserves to be lived in its fullness, despite the falls, despite the pains, despite the dark nights that sometimes seem to have no end. My dears who have accompanied me to this point, sharing with me sweet and bitter memories, I want to leave with you some words that were born not from books, not from theories, but from life lived in its many colors and textures. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to begin each day anew. When I look at my hands today, wrinkled and marked by time, I see in them not only the signs of old age, but the instruments that allowed me to rebuild my life, brick by brick, stitch by stitch. If you are going through difficult moments, if the darkness seems to have no end, hold on to this truth that I discovered in the darkest moments. Even in the darkest night, there exists a star shining somewhere. Sometimes we can't see it immediately, but it's there, waiting for our eyes to get accustomed to the darkness to finally reveal it. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Each line on my face represents a lesson learned, an obstacle overcome, a joy lived intensely. I'm not ashamed of my marks. They are proof that I lived, that I felt, that I survived. If someone hurt you deeply, if you carry wounds that seem not to heal, know that time is a great ally. Not because it erases the pains, it doesn't erase them, but because it teaches us to carry them with more dignity, to transform them into understanding, into wisdom, sometimes even into purpose. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. We may feel that it has weakened, that it is just a small, trembling spark, but as long as there is life, there will be that light, and from it, we can rekindle the flame of hope, of self-love, of dignity. For those who are living in a situation of abuse or violence, I want to say with all the strength of my heart, you deserve more. You deserve respect, dignity, true love. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. And there is, yes, a way to get out of that situation, even when all doors seem closed. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. The human being has an incredible capacity for resistance, for adaptation, for overcoming. When we think we've reached our limit, we're usually just beginning to discover our true strength. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. The scars remain, yes, but they can transform from symbols of pain into marks of resistance, into testimonies of overcoming. Today, when I remember that night in the Pine Creek Cemetery, I no longer feel the paralyzing terror of before, but a strange peace from knowing that we did what was necessary to survive. My story is not about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. We could have surrendered to hatred, to bitterness, to the desire for revenge. And for a time, yes, we felt all that. But we chose, day after day, to build something different, something better. We chose love, family, new beginnings. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time. I fell many times along the way. There were days when the weight of memories was so great that I could barely get out of bed. Nights when the fear returned, visceral and suffocating. Moments when I doubted if I would ever be normal again. but each time I found strength to get up once more, to take one more step, no matter how small. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like those stubborn flowers that grow in the cracks of asphalt, proving that life finds ways even in the most unlikely places. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. For a long time I kept quiet, believing that my story was too shameful to be told. Today I understand that sharing it can be a way to extend a hand to others who are still in the dark, showing that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Age gave me wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. I began quilting at 50, reading novels at 60, teaching adults at 65. I discovered new talents, new interests, new passions. Life doesn't stop surprising us if we're open to its possibilities. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end in the painful chapters. They are just parts of a much larger book with many pages still to be written. And we are, in large part, the authors of those future pages. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each moment of genuine joy, each spontaneous laugh, each warm hug was a victory against those who tried to destroy our capacity to love and trust. In any place in the world, in any culture or country, there are people and organizations ready to help those who suffer abuse or violence. Seek that help. You are not alone, even when you feel completely isolated. There are hands extended waiting to help you out of that dark place. The community has a fundamental role in protecting the most vulnerable. Let's be attentive to the signs of abuse around us, the constant fear, the progressive isolation, the abrupt changes in behavior. Sometimes, an attentive look, a word of support, an extended hand at the right moment can save a life. Human rights know no borders. Dignity, respect, freedom are universal values, fundamental rights of each human being, regardless of where they are born or live. Fighting for these rights is the responsibility of all of us. And to you, my dears, who have followed my story to this point, I have a special request. Subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell now, because this is not just my story. It's a wake-up call, a virtual hug for those who need to hear that there is hope. Share this video immediately with all the people you know, because we never know who might need to hear exactly these words at this moment. Your share might be the beacon that someone is desperately looking for amid the storm. Leave in the comments the word miracle so I know who reached the end of this journey with me, who heard my heart open completely. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Together, we can create a network of support, of understanding, of hope that surpasses borders and reaches those who need it most. I end with a certainty that I carry in my heart. No matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. Always. It's the law of nature. It's the law of life. Believe this when everything seems lost. The dawn may take time, but it will come. And when it comes, you will be there to see it. Stronger, wiser, more you. With all my affection and gratitude for having listened to me, Eleanor Grace,